Yes. So first of all, thank you so much, guys, for joining in today, and thank you so much, Everett, for joining us for this guest session. It's going to be 1 hour session, okay, wherein first I'll have a few of my questions that I'll ask you, and then we'll move into an open Q&A. We have a lot of people who have asked a lot of interesting questions as part of the Google form that they submitted. So I would want them to actually put up all of their questions in the chat as well, so that we can go through it. So yeah, thank you so much, Everett, for joining in. For all of you who don't know who Everett is the head of GTM Engineering at Clay, and he's been very kind to join us for this guest session, especially to sort of provide us with his insights on what GTM Engineering is all about, what Clay is up to, how is Clay planning to expand into the APAC market. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Yes, Everett, whatever insights you want to throw at us, we'll be very much open to take it up. So coming to my very first question is, so today, GTM engineering, okay, earlier, say 2 years ago, it was a relatively fair new concept, but today it's one of the most talked about functions in modern sales or marketing or product marketing roles. And before we actually say get into the tools and tactics of things and how do you define them, would love to know more about what do you define as GTM engineering today, and what do you think people fundamentally misunderstand about the concept of GTM engineering?
Yeah. So thank you so much. It's great to be here. I mean, obviously love this topic. I think, um, broad strokes, GTM engineering is the application of engineering principles and technology to go to market. And there's a definition at Clay that our my colleague Osman, who is one of the best in the world at this stuff, uses, which is GTM engineers remove the constraints that stop companies from growing as fast as possible. And I think that as you look within a sales and marketing team, that is what you see. There are often constraints on growth that are not caused by like the market or the product or necessarily even the salespeople, but they are caused by the fact that like the technology and the process and all of that doesn't work the way it could. And as no coding tools, it's kind of funny to me actually. No code was kind of like a buzzword that like people kind of expected it and sort of formed the opinion that it wasn't working. But actually, no code sort of kept growing and becoming more powerful. And the very first go to market engineering flows were really just, I would describe them as like no coded flows. So um, Clay was an early company that was doing this, and I started using Clay for this. But pretty much what I was doing was just automating the sort of individual steps that our sellers would take at my previous role in order to generate pipeline. And today, especially with the kind of advent of large language models, go-to-market engineering has become much more than that. It's become sort of a way that companies can just gain leverage in their go-to-market, and it's a way that they can also make sure that they are taking advantage of all the latest capabilities within AI. And companies that are doing that are often some of the fastest growing companies in the world. And so go-to-market engineers sit at the center of that. One misconception that I find often with go-to-market engineering is the idea that kind of like the outputs are the thing that you build. So people will kind of look to their go-to-market engineer to build a highly automated outbound system and book meetings without people and stuff like that. And obviously that's part of it, but the real thing that go-to-market engineering enables, in my opinion, is very fast experimentation. And I think like you really see this in product and engineering teams. They don't necessarily always know that a certain feature is going to work or that a certain kind of like idea that they have is going to be successful. But what they're able to do with their systems is ship products and test them with users and get feedback. And especially obviously in the tech world, this is true. A different situation in pharma or something like that. But at least in software, product teams and engineering teams have been able to ship very quickly, and so they can kind of iteratively get to the right idea for what the product should do based on user feedback and metrics they collect and so forth. And so I think a really good engineering team actually operates like that. They They have their system set up so they can ship plays or data or automations or software for their sales reps as fast as like a product team would, and then they can get feedback on that. And a really good GTM engineering team will be able to iterate very quickly, and you could almost judge them by their success in kind of like how fast they launch new campaigns and how fast they're able to iterate. And that's really new for a lot of go-to-market teams. A lot of companies, and they might it might take them 2 or 3 months to launch some sort of campaign, and go-to-market engineering is kind of like the opposite of that. So yeah, it's an incredibly exciting field, and sometimes I tell people go-to-market engineers are kind of like as a career, it's kind of an index on model capabilities. So as models get more powerful, go-to-market engineers can like leverage those techniques and sort of gain more leverage within their own organizations. And there's not actually a ton of roles like that. It's software engineering is probably like that, but this is a role that really is kind of grown as model capabilities have improved.
Interesting. That actually brings me to my next question. And this is something that I was actually hoping to ask because a lot of the people wanted to know this, that when a GTM engineer joins a company, okay, that's their on day one when they join that company, how should they go about building systems? Okay, in terms of say defining what sort of ICP to target, what sort of signals to track. As a GTM engineer, how would you design your first 30 or 60 days to give certain sort of output in terms of either strategy, in terms of a system? How would one go about doing it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the two key pieces to get in place are like a data foundation and an orchestration system. And so kind of going back to focusing on the inputs, the first thing that GTM engineer should do is really just kind of audit the CRM and the first party data that a company has and figure out, for example, if I have a software product, am I able to access usage data for that product from within my CRM? Or am I able to access that to use in my campaigns in some way? And so, generally speaking, I think you want to be able to have confidence in your first party data and have all that connected in, even if it's messy right now. That's okay. You want to be able to acquire new data and signals as fast as you have ideas. And Clay has kind of a data marketplace set up for that. There's other options that you can use to be able to access lots of data all at the same time. And then you want to make sure that you can connect all the systems together. So your sequencer, your dialer, your note taker, your CRM, your data warehouse, all the sort of systems that you would expect to use within your go-to-market, you want to have those all connected to the same place. Those that work sometimes I see that take customers 2 or 3 months to actually get going, because they might not have that right now, or the way that they've done it is sort of not in the best way for doing go-to-market engineering work. And so that's kind of my first step. And then yeah, to your point, like one reason a go-to-market engineer might have more trouble initially is like if sales and marketing disagree on the ICP definition, or people disagree on like what's a good fit customer, how big is the market, which companies should be in the market. So go-to-market engineering forces you to kind of like encode what your company thinks about their customers in a system. And again, you could encode that in Clay. A lot of people are using, Claude or something these days, but broadly speaking, it forces some alignment in the company so that you can begin to launch centralized things. Then once you have all that in place, usually most companies, if they're having any kind of traction at all, have some things that are working already. And so oftentimes there's like a certain rep that is really successful with their outbound, or there is a certain motion within the company that's working really well. I like to kind of start in those places and see what can be done to replicate that success in a more kind of scalable way. And so it might come down to some things like ICP. Like you might talk to a rep and they might say, well, I always know this account is a good fit because of XYZ reason.
Yeah.
And if you check your data, you see that, oh, I don't actually have a good way to capture that reason and like apply that to all my other accounts. And so, but typically you can get your systems and data in a good place and then notch some early wins by finding the thing that is working well within the company. Could be a couple things, and focusing on automating that for everybody. And generally what you'd like to see then is like as another example, if I was forced, kind of gun to my head to like generate pipeline for a company, there's only a few campaigns I would run. I would run probably like a close lost reactivation campaign, job changers campaign, and probably some sort of like social content campaign.
Yeah.
You would want to be able to look back on the first 2 or 3 months of your GTM engineering role and say, the system that we built here is actually achieving these results that we didn't have before. So you can't just spend all of your time sort of like hooking things together and building a really good foundation. But that is a big part of it, because what you want to be able to do is experiment quickly and launch new things quickly. And it's really hard. It's hard to do that if you don't have your data and your orchestration layer in a good place.
Makes total sense. Okay, when you speak about say those insights that say individuals have, those who are winning better accounts or who are getting some good output, uh, one of the biggest things that I have seen is when I try to explain clay to people that okay, clay can do this level of enrichment or it's used for AI about prospecting. The question that comes in is how do we define what to use in clay in terms of either a tool or in terms of using a clay agent? How do we define that? Okay. There's more on that lines.
Yeah.
If you could share insights on how can one go about starting, using clay as an AI powered enrichment platform.
Yeah. So in terms of like when to use Clay to look up data in the data marketplace versus use ClayGen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So the current thing with AI is the models are only good as the information you give it, as the context you give it. And it's surprising sometimes like how little context that is. And for example, like a lot of models are advertised with 1 million token context windows, but in practice, especially if you talk to a software engineer about this, they would tell you that they mostly aren't using more than like 150K or 200K tokens in their context windows, because the models, if you use more tokens than that, will end up sort of forgetting or doubling back or getting confused. And if you've ever done like a long running Claude Code session or something like that, you'll kind of see this effect. The model will begin to sort of implement things that it already implemented, or forget about features that it added, things like that, as it sort of fills up the context window. So the implications of that in go-to-market are basically, let's say I want to work on an account and I've got, some call history with that account. If you just naively load in like 6 Gong calls into, or 6 call recordings into a model's context window, that will fill up probably something like 150K tokens just right there. So you have to do some smart things in order to like assemble your context in the right way. So for example, you might, instead of taking the raw call transcript and loading that into a model, you might pass that through an agent which pulls out the med pick criteria that happened on the call. Or you might filter that to an agent which looks for only product gaps, or looks for adherence to the sales process or something like that. And so the like trick for using Clay as a kind of agentic enrichment or prospecting engine is to use it as the tool that fills the context window with the appropriate amount of information. And a lot of times what that means actually is starting with the data marketplace, where you have data from these different data sets, which has been validated and not only validated by the providers, but also Clay runs its own validation and has our own data team that looks through all the data and tests it. And so you want elements of your enrichment engine that are not AI, basically, so that you can ground what the LLM is going to do and the decisions it's going to make, and information that is kind of outside of its own, AI generated sphere. Because what can happen if you don't do that, like let's just say you chain a bunch of agents together, the agents will gradually sort of introduce wrong information or like lose context as they go. And so at the end, you might end up making kind of a totally wrong decision about what to include in a message that you use against the prospect. And so when I'm building these flows out, I will typically even tell my sessions to start with the data marketplace, or start with conditional logic, or start with things that are not AI, in order for me to kind of reach the end state where I have an agent running or I have something running, and that thing ends up being pretty much fully agentic. Um, and um, and so generally speaking, what you would do then is you would set up some kind of like um, deterministic workflows. So you have like a, enrich using this data provider, make this decision, enrich using that data provider. And then at some point in the workflow, you would reach an agent. And then generally what you're trying to do is, at least the way this works, like in practice in Clay, for example, is we will create agent managed fields within your CRM. And so the workflows will, and the agents will populate these fields. And then when you're a decision agent about what next step you want to take on an account, or what message you want to send, or whatever action you're trying to kind of make sure happens within your process, that decision agent will leverage all of the context that's been assembled for it previously by, pretty much non-agentic flows. Um, and so it's the ways to use agents with Clay are: number one, to use agents to build Clay workflows. That works really well. Number two, to use agents as sort of the part of the system that assembles all the context together and kind of reads through it. But not to use agents and AI for every piece of the thing that you're doing, because it's just going to be really hard to get all the right context in the right place, and then downstream, basically your AI will end up relying on things that were hallucinated upstream, at least with the current generation of models. Basically, you can think of a lot of application layer companies like Play in the GTM space, Harvey Lagora in the legal space, Cursor in the coding space, as basically like context management engines for the LLM. And then at some point, you reach a place in that system where you want the LLM to kind of take over using all the information you've assembled for it previously.
Quite interesting. I think that would the way to set up agents or that entire workflow streamlines a lot of things, especially when you want to not lose out on the context. So I think that makes sense. Uh, my last question before we move into a Q&A with the attendees is if you could just share quick insights into how Clay is planning to build things up for the APAC market, because you have a lot of people who actually ask us questions that when is Clay going to come with some interesting
Yeah.
features or some interesting stuff for the APAC market. So if you could just quickly highlight that.
Yeah, so we definitely have plans to kind of have offices all around the world. We opened our office in London earlier this year. We will open an APAC office at some point. My guess is it will be within the next year, but there's sort of higher powers have to make that decision. But there's a couple of other things that we're working on that I think will be interesting. One is we're working on kind of like a low cost plan for Clay, which will enable. It will largely be kind of like API based, actually, and it will be sort of like developers or agencies, or folks in other markets that don't. The starting price for Clay right now I think is $185 a month, and so we're going to come in well below that, and that's going to be launching pretty soon, actually. And then the second thing is there's a bunch of more data providers that we're adding kind of all around the world. So earlier or I guess it was, yeah, mostly in the spring, we added a whole swath of APAC providers, and we're on the hunt for more and integrating more. And a lot of those providers themselves are kind of like geared towards specific regions. Japan, for example, is a tough market for data. We've added specialized Japan providers. We are working on that kind of all throughout Southeast Asia in particular. Um, and so the element of Clay that is kind of localized through our data marketplace will have a big emphasis. And then the same thing will be true of models. Like Clay today supports open weight models, and we support things like DeepSeek and models that you might use if you are, more conscious of your token costs or things like that, and or running on, you know, different clouds or something like that have hardware constraints. And so, at the end of the day, you should see from Clay kind of like a low cost entry point plan with support for open weight models and regional specific data providers that I think should make it like a hopefully a really compelling choice for use all around the world, not just for American tech companies. And and then on top of that, there's already a bunch of Clay clubs in India. There will be more that are coming, and then there will be at some point an actual physical APAC office, and at some point likely also an office in India. I don't know I don't know if our first office will open in possibly Australia or Singapore, or there's like many different options, I think. But our founders are both immigrants, and my boss Varun is well, we could spend a whole lot of time on Varun's relationships with India and all of that, but they are excited about it, and I think it won't be too long before there are not only plans and data providers and so forth available for folks in APAC, but also offices and much more just kind of on the ground support from Clay.
Awesome. That sounds really great. Thank you so much, Everett, for answering my questions. Now, for the questions from the audiences, very quick thing. What we'll be doing is that you guys can raise your hands. Okay, I'll one by one call you guys out. And rest, folks, please do also put in your questions on the chat. And I think we have the first question from Hartej. Yeah, Hartej, over to you.
Hey, hi Everett. I'm in a little bit of a very like niche situation. Is that I am basically leading GTM in my angel funded startup, and I it's been like about 6 months in the workplace. And I want to ask you, when you're solo, when there's no sales rep, when there's no systems which are basically set up for you, when there are like you have to set up the website, the SEO, the inbound, the outbound, and there's no sales rep to support you in that. How do you actually do that, and how do you prevent yourself from being overwhelmed in that situation? Because I have been exploring Claude, Clay, and everything. It's just like what
Yeah.
is the effectiveness of everything?
Yeah. So first of all, I was in your seat like 3 or 4 years ago. I was the first growth hire at my last company, and we had no sales reps for a while. So what I was doing in that scenario was I was more or less trying to help our founders create demand, and then the founders would take a lot of the calls or sales calls or so forth. We also had a PLG product, so we were trying to help people convert onto that product. And so I think like there's only a few things starting out that are really important. One of them actually that a lot of companies don't have is just kind of what I call the golden list of accounts, where basically if you got a magical intro to any of those accounts, you would be like really excited about that meeting. And that's true of accounts, also true of contacts. So kind of having the right people in all of your accounts. And so my like litmus test for this is basically, is the data good enough that you can basically set up a dinner, for example, for your founder in some country, or for your leadership in some country, and or some city, and if you have like 20 seats at the table to surround them with prospects, can you actually go into your data and easily filter for who those 20 people are? Like accounts that are warm, or the deals we're in progress with, or the right execs and so forth. And actually, most early stage companies kind of struggle with this, and a lot of late stage companies struggle with it too. They don't really have like a golden list of people that at any one moment they want to chat with. So I think establishing that is always usually my number one priority, especially working with a kind of an earlier stage team. And then from there, you can learn a lot. You can learn kind of like what marketing will be effective for those folks. You can learn where are your people based, how can you reach them, how, like, what content do they care about, things like that. And so I always kind of begin with that as the first thing. SEO is um, one of the problems with SEO early on is it is kind of reliant on brand. It's hard to these days like trick Google necessarily to send a lot of traffic your way if you don't have like a large established brand or some kind of notoriety. And so my first like actual marketing activities usually would be on social in some way, trying to sort of drive impressions to a company via X or LinkedIn or what have you. And SEO, I think, typically would take like more of a back seat when I'm getting started. Now, obviously, if your leadership wants you to work on SEO, then that's like a different story. But the golden list and kind of really understanding if I have everybody in my market that I care about accounted for, and then working backwards from that to decide sort of like what marketing and sales efforts to run. Obviously, if you're really capacity constrained and you have no reps, and you're booking meetings for yourself or your founders, it's even more important to make sure that you're spending time with only the people that you really care about. So that's kind of overall strategy wise, and then just like tactics wise, I mean, I do think Clay, normally we see it used at companies that have at least a few sales reps. I mean, it's not exactly like the first tool that I would reach for in like a brand new company. But if you have it and you know how to use it, it is really powerful because then you can run experiments, all the time. And so if you have your kind of golden list created, you can then run experiments against different segments of that list and learn what works. And so yeah, probably a couple of thoughts on strategy and tactics at that stage. But then the flip side of that is you would definitely kind of find things that you would deprioritize. And someone told me recently that they thought like the mark of a good executive is knowing which fires to let burn. So you have things that you're working on that or you could work on that are just not as needle moving as other things. And so being able to sort through that and so kind of say what you're going to say no to and what you're going to say yes to is probably like a huge part of working your way through that or that earlier stage.
Okay, that's interesting. And like both of these, like everything you do can scale up. Like my question was basically, as the only person, like how do you decide between various channels, inbound and outbound, and how do you control the effectiveness of each? Like, what do you focus on?
Yeah. You know, inbound is kind of like a blessing and a curse. It's obviously amazing because customers just show up at your door, but it's out of your control. So I've been at many companies where the inbound has fluctuated really dramatically, throughout the year or year over year. So I actually generally favor and if you can control your destiny and have an ability to basically, and I'm using very much like a B2B sales context here, but if you have the ability to basically decide who you want to get meetings with and get those meetings and know why that's important and convert customers from that, that more than anything is like the lifeblood of kind of a long-term successful company. And most companies, even if they have a really strong inbound for a long time, will work on developing an outbound motion for exactly that reason, because eventually you want to be able to control your own destiny. So I generally would prioritize being able to, I mean, it doesn't have to be the main thing you do. And like I said, inbound is really good, but I generally would prioritize being able to get in touch with customers and control all the variables around you meeting them. And then from there, I would follow the segment of customers that, closes the fastest at the highest dollar amounts, basically. And you can obviously have some strategy behind it. Clay, for example, we didn't focus on enterprise at first because we wanted to create very much a PLG motion, and what we were doing was also new. And so if you're doing something very new, then it's hard to get established players to start on it. If you're doing something which is kind of like a well understood problem and you have an innovative solution to it, then it really does make more sense in a lot of cases to go pretty outbound and really try to control your destiny that way. The other thing is that inbound and outbound feed off each other. So what you learn doing outbound really influences actually how you market the product as well. And at the very early stage, I might just even consider, sending different types of messaging and campaigns to different people in different segments, and which of those campaigns perform well actually might dictate how you kind of do your inbound marketing.
Thank you so much, Everett.
Got it. That was great. Thanks, Everett.
Yeah, I think next up is Sad. Yes, Sad.
Hi Everett, how are you doing?
Hey, doing
So
well.
yeah, so basically, I have a question that is the thing that you has mentioned earlier. So basically, let me give you a quick overview of my about myself. So basically, I have been doing around 6 to 7 years in primarily doing outbound. So back in last year, I leveraged Clay like 2025. So basically, once Clay has come, so that has more focus regarding outbound. So, and we also jumped in and Clay introduced the title name, like, go to market engineer, but that is more specifically for outbound. And we also jumped into that and we, get the jobs related to the outbound. So now, what the thing that I have been, saying, the go to market trend is more advanced now. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Like, now the trend has been changing. Clay has also moved, the trends from outbound to enterprise that are more focused regarding in the RevOps side, revenue engineers, CRM operations, and the systems. So, what is the take from moving forward to excel and expand our like GTM skills?
Yeah, totally. So the generally at Clay itself, we try never to go like purely cold outbound. I do think that strategy these days relies on pretty sophisticated email infrastructure, honestly, to make it work. Plus, just like a very zeroed in idea of what who your target is and so forth. And for what it's worth, as I was just saying, like establishing that very specific definition of who your target is and why they buy and everything, that is like one of the number one things you can do to help a specific company on the at the early stage. But ideally, when you're going out to the market, you can establish some sort of surround sound noise for your prospects. So you can do this at different scales. Obviously, at Clay's current scale, we do kind of everything. We do billboards, in-person events, ads, and we sort of try to make sure that companies have some awareness of us before our sellers contact them. Um, but you don't have to go like super crazy. What I would probably do though is try to have a unified list across sales and marketing that you can activate on. And so that might mean that golden list of 1,000 people. Let's say 1,000 accounts. Let's say that translates into 5,000 people. That's big enough for an ad audience on LinkedIn, or if you want to go a little bit cheaper, you can go Meta. Generally, Google ads are saved for kind of like later in the game. Meta is going to be probably your best like bang for the buck. Um, but then what you want to have happen basically is a scenario where people see your ads and then you contact them, and then maybe there's a third channel that they somehow find out about you on. It could be just social content, it could be some in-person event that you do, and so on. But by the time you actually are in conversation with them, or they're responding to you, they have some idea of who you are and what your company does. Another way to tackle this is with signal-based outbound, which is probably like the most successful thing that's happening right now. And with signal-based outbound, what you're relying on essentially is the timing. So not only right person, right message, but you hit them at a point where you believe that they're actively looking for something or in the market. And with signal-based outbound, it's the challenge kind of becomes, can you come up with a signal that is differentiated from what everybody else is using? So I always give the example of like an HR leader changing jobs. The moment they start their new job, they get emails from Ramp and Rippling and Workday and everybody, right? And so if your target is HR leaders for some solution, maybe you could send them a gift, or maybe you can find some sort of reason why they get bombarded with emails when they first join, but actually when they buy your software, it's more like 3 to 6 months in, and you're kind of tracking that. Or they need to kind of for example, for Clay, if a company doesn't have like a GTM engineer or a real operations function, that's a much harder company for us to work with. And so we wait for signals of companies or use data to figure out if companies have sizable teams that can use Clay, at least at the enterprise level. So so the kind of system comes back around where ideally you have a very targeted idea of who you're going after and why. You surround them on like a few different channels with messaging, and then your signals program leverages something that you kind of uniquely know about the company, or that you've learned about the company, that will allow you to contact that person at the right time. And so those things working together are sort of the way that people are creating alpha these days. I will say, like, the unique signal part can be harder than it sounds. It's a lot of times it comes down to actually like the leadership's idea of why people buy their software, what event leads to people buying their software. And you can get that pretty custom, especially with all the tools that we have today. And the thing I would ask is, like, if a company doesn't have sort of like a unique idea about how they should go to market, then the GTM engineering task becomes really challenging, because then you're no longer competing in kind of like the idea space. You're competing on who has better systems and data, and that is more of a level playing field than if you have sort of creative thinkers and you're able to implement things quickly and get messaging out there. So So yeah, it's a different world than when I started in B2B like 5 or 6 years ago. We were legitimately just like emailing everyone that visited our website, and that's no longer the strategy that works.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Everett. Yeah, next question is from Hassan. Yes.
Thanks, Everett. Thanks, everyone. Everett, really appreciate your insights here. Quick question. It's similar to the earlier question with Art Tej, but it's a specific question for me. So I kind of do fractional work. I still have my 9 to 5, but I'll do fractional work on the side and work with like different teams. The biggest team I ever worked with was a company that had at least 30 employees, but currently I've downsized to like 1 to 3. Similar reason with Clay. I find when I work with smaller teams, it's more efficient. So
Yeah.
my question to you is, if you were to work with a technical builder who was a CISO in their current day-to-day job, they've built a solution, very technical solution. Not sure if you're familiar with remote monitoring management. And how would you approach that in this era of go-to-market if they don't have a sales team, as you mentioned? I know that's not something Clay works with specifically, but how would you approach that situation? Would you focus more on developing or leveraging the relationships that this person has in their life, or would you focus more on, developing like a value-based outbound message? Now, second part to that question, do you think creating content in the form of, let's say, again, leveraging your C-suite experience, sharing insights around this on your LinkedIn, would that be an effective strategy? And if so, how would you measure that? Hope that's not too loaded of a question.
Yeah, well, certainly the having like an expert in the space as the tip of your spear for go to market is a great asset. I would most likely set up campaigns that come from his inbox or come from his LinkedIn when you're messaging people, and use that as the primary way that you're getting in touch with folks. The other thing I would probably do is focus on like a thought leadership element from him. So setting up some unique point of view on the space that he can talk about and really hammer home that hopefully aligns with what the company does and what the solution does. And those those two pieces together, you'll know you're succeeding if you end up having so much demand that you need to hire salespeople officially. And so a lot of it, like even at Clay today, we really rely on our leadership team to be posting on LinkedIn, and we rely on content still super heavily. And so that is an amazing way to get things started. Now, measuring content and the success of content is a little bit more, I would say, qualitative than like an email campaign. So you're generally going to be looking for things like some evidence that the content is being shared or discussed in like group chats or being shared around. I really like to look at saves on LinkedIn as like a indication of how good the post is as a piece of content. And actually, I believe LinkedIn's algorithm does like really appreciate it when there's lots of saves on a post, for example. So for example, I did my Clay's Tech Stack 2026 post, and like I think it had like 400 likes, but it had like 600 saves, which is indicative of something that people are gonna. I mean, I think in practice, no one really checks their saved content on LinkedIn, but it's a signal that people are like, hey, would refer back to this if I wanted to later. Um, and um, and then if you're getting success with that first piece of content that resonates, you can sort of get in touch with everybody that engages with that, as long as they fit your ICP, and then kind of sell to them per se, but just like lightly like build a relationship with them. And then I think that sort of coincides with hopefully this person's existing network. The only problem with existing network is it's really hard to actually like figure out and measure. Like LinkedIn connections is sort of a, just depending how they've managed it, it might not really reflect who they actually know and who they have worked with. So that one is, the best way to kind of do a network connection piece is to just like build that golden list and sit that person down and be like, do you know this company, this company, this company, this company, this person, this person, this person, and sort of go through and do it manually. It's super hard to capture that automatically in my experience. So yeah, a combination of kind of like heavy emphasis on content thought leadership from the CISO's account, establish their name in the space and so on, or make their name bigger, and then make sure that messaging that goes out comes from that person's email or that person's LinkedIn, and really like utilizes their background as a reason for someone taking a meeting or something like that. And then if those things are successful, eventually your CISO will look at his calendar and say, okay, I just have sales meetings all week, and so you're going to need actual salespeople in that point.
Thanks, man. Really appreciate that answer, Everett. I'll definitely be connecting with you on LinkedIn and looking for that post with the 600 saves. I'll make it
Yeah, please
601.
do. Yeah, no, it's it's not last week, but it's the week before. I had a few good ones.
Say no more. I'll be there. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Hassan. Yeah, next question I think is from Nilesh.
Yeah, hi, Everett. Interesting session. And I have a quick question on first party intent signal. As you mentioned to Saad that currently whether that is the trend or not, I'm not really sure. But like I love the way you have mentioned about your first GTM setup role. Like once we do the entire setup, is that part of initial setup process where we set up like whoever opened the website, whoever opened the form page or downloaded something, integrated that clay code inside the website and get those signal like which are the companies who are actually taking these actions. Is that part of that first foundation setup done by GTM Engineering?
Yes, definitely. And like the problem is basically feedback and go to market is pretty sparse. So for example, you could send 100 emails and get like one response, and then it's like, okay, how do you actually know if that there's no data there to kind of go off of? So the first party signals piece is really important because it's an additional data source to tell you how well things are working. So if you email, 100 accounts and like one person responds, but then 20 of them are on your website, you know that like something happened. And there's different opinions on if you should do like open tracking and email and so forth. I i generally like to do it until I have some like real confidence that the messaging that I'm using is successful, and then you can turn it off because turning it off will increase conversion rates most likely. But email opens, website visits, webinar signups, product signups, engagement on social, um, uh, like there's lots of kind of additional data points that you can capture about around your campaigns to kind of tell you if things are working or not. um, and it's not so easy always to capture those. And at Clay, like we have put some effort into making it so that if you set up Clay in different places on your system, that generally all the data kind of flows back in, and you can use that to activate on your campaigns. But this is exactly like, it's a great point, Nilesh. This is exactly what I mean about setting up the data foundation at the beginning, because at some point you're going to want to like take stock of what you've been doing the last 3 or 6 months. And if you have a historical record where you could say, okay, we didn't care about website visits during this campaign, but now looking back, I can see that actually a lot of the people that we emailed, their accounts ended up on our website. And because you have the data collection piece in place, you can actually say that. That's very, very helpful. And there's almost never a situation go to market where you're like, oh, I have too much data. When you have too much data, that's actually a problem that you can use agents to solve. You can point agents at a mess of first party data that's been coming in and say, hey, like what's happening here? Like help me organize this. But if you never have the data coming in, then you are you're not able to kind of make reach real conclusions about the work that you've been doing. So yeah, um, obviously intent signals and other signals are super helpful for this as well, to understand if you're kind of making any noise in the market. But yeah, it's really important to have that set up so you can at least begin to build your feedback loop. And again, I think it's just less about which specific ideas you have, as do you have a foundational setup that allows you to kind of try lots of ideas very quickly. The teams that do that can sort of iterate their way into success, assuming the product is reasonably good and everything. But the teams that sort of say, okay, this is how we're going to go to market, and they never change their opinion on that, no matter what the feedback. That's where you don't usually see as much growth and as much kind of experimentation.
Got it. Got it. Appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nilesh. I think the next question is from Vijay. Yeah, Vijay.
Yeah, hey, Everett. My question is a follow-up to your earlier response on, going after established companies. Now, for example, and very interestingly, you said that, because you're not established, people won't buy from you. So how do you then tweak your ICP in a manner? So if your ICPs are established companies, and obviously, there is that credibility issue. Um, so could you give me an example on what would you do in that case? Do you sell to a ICP -1, -2 kind of a level? And, so that's one part of the question. The second part is that, I'd be very interested to know what Clay did at that point in time when they just started out, because this category of GTM engineering was not there. And then they kind of positioned themselves very smartly, and they called this GTM engineering, and suddenly people were hiring GTM engineers when there was not a category there at all. So yeah, that's an interesting case study. I'd love to hear more from you on this.
Yeah. Well, so I'll start with the history of Clay. Clay actually was established in 2017, and it really wasn't until 2021 that the Clay that you know today began to take off. So they spent many, many years testing different things and really working on something that wasn't working for a long time. And and the initial focus for Clay was basically there was a population of go-to-market agencies which needed two things. They needed on-demand access to data, so they weren't going to pay, like 100K for an annual contract with a data provider, and they needed ability to quickly iterate on their own campaigns. And for cold outbound agencies and or agencies in general, you sort of like it's an interesting business because, for example, there's a lot of agencies that like might acquire but also lose lots of customers, and that's sort of like how the business works. You're only as good as your latest ability to book meetings and so forth. And there's also lots of reasons why outbound just doesn't work. You could be working for a company that really has a poor reputation in the market, or there's some constraint that you don't control that means that the campaigns you run for your clients don't resonate. And so agencies expect that. They expect to sort of like be testing lots of things, onboarding different companies, losing some of those companies, and sort of needing to evolve very quickly with how they're working. So Clay at the beginning, as a product, solved those two problems, and thus our first customers were cold outbound agencies. However, the agencies provided another really nice thing, which they still do today, which is that they have to show their customers that they are doing advanced things in order for them to acquire customers. So what people would do then is post about these crazy Clay workflows that they were building on LinkedIn that were getting results as a way for those agencies to attract customers. Um, and then that started to kind of spread the word about Clay to the rest of the market. And so then our like people at small companies like me that were in charge of growth saw Clay and was like, oh, this is really cool, and started using it for different things. And then that built momentum for us to gain credibility with larger and larger customers over time. And so we started very, very small, with typically like 1 to 2 person companies, and now Google and Salesforce and Verizon and everybody else is a customer. But it took probably 3 or 4 years to get there. And so we took the route of establishing credibility with like the N-1 ICP that you described. But you just have to establish your credibility in some way. So in the earlier question, if for a CISO that is known in the market and has a good track record at different companies, they can likely reach out directly, and they'll be a credible person even if their product isn't all the way out or the customers aren't there. Similarly, if you get a really good investor, they can introduce you to people, and with that introduction, they're kind of putting their stamp on your company, and that's giving you credibility. So it just has to be something that you can point to and say, we're like among the best in the world at doing this, and here's the proof. And then if you have that, oftentimes you can actually get meetings with these large companies. In many cases, these companies have tons and tons of problems they're trying to solve, and they have more problems than they have resources internally to solve. But they can't just make bets on vendors that have no, like, they have to defend internally some purchase that they're making. And so you imagine if someone is talking about you behind your back and they're saying, oh, these guys are so great because of XYZ, like, what are the reasons that they're saying that if I'm like a VP buying a solution, I'm talking to my SVP in that conversation, that SVP says, okay, this seems like a real thing. Versus, oh, Everett, he is always interested in these wacky things. Like it's just another one of those. So some ability to establish credibility has to kind of be there, and you can choose different strategies for that. For Clay, we started very small and have worked our way up through larger customers. But you can go straight to the top as long as you have some ability to say, we are like the real deal.
Yeah. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, Puneet.
Yeah. Hartej, we'll take up your question another time. I think we'll take up Karthik's question. Okay. That'll be the last question for today. But yeah, Karthik, over to you.
Everett, I've been a fan of Clay since the early days, and I've seen it grow right from the PLG motion to building distribution with Mishti and the whole team. My
Totally.
question really to you right now is, if you had to start over all again with less than 10 customers, no meaningful traffic, no established audience, what would you do differently? Because I think in the AI first era, building distribution is a key because the product modes are getting challenged. It's easy to create products very quickly and duplicate features. So what did you do differently if you're building Clay now for an AI first era, in terms of building distribution and the whole process?
Well, one thing I am thinking a lot about is just this idea that the agents are finding products themselves, or people using chatbots are sort of taking the recommendations from those chatbots. So it's actually like an open problem in the space of how to create growth, like using Claude or something like that. And there's kind of two vectors. One is, does your product itself have like a consumption based model or some way for agents to discover it and start using it? If someone was saying, hey, like, um, hey Claude, go find me a way to do XYZ, will they actually find your solution and be able to start using it? And that has a lot to do with kind of like product, and do you have sort of an API first or MCP first approach, so forth. But then the other thing is, figuring out how to ensure that if people are just talking to Claude or ChatGPT or something else about a space, does your name come up? So, for example, if people are talking about data enrichment with their chatbots, I want Clay to always be mentioned as an option. So I would spend a lot of time thinking through that, and that is it's a new growth loop that no one has really cracked. It's unknown. It's not as well covered as something like SEO or Outbound, and but as the usage of these services increase, it's going to be a way that people are going to use the products kind of like very differently. So I would be spending a lot of time on that, I think. In addition to what I mentioned before, building the golden list and being able to sort of iterate yourself. Ultimately, you want to control your own destiny, because even if you crack, Claude recommending a solution or something, they could change the way that they are doing that tomorrow, and if that's the only way that you're growing, then that could be trouble. And in fact, that did just recently happen. OpenAI is sort of not relying on Reddit citations as much anymore for ChatGPT, and that has impacted growth for a couple of companies where that was like a key part of their strategy. So things are always changing and evolving. I would be thinking a lot about kind of agentic LLM first growth right now. But I would still go back to basics, have my golden list, have a way to get in touch with customers that were a good fit for the company, know why they're taking meetings or why they aren't taking meetings, and be able to sort of ultimately control your own destiny in a credible way.
Cool. Thank you so much. I think Hartej, we have time for one more last question. You can just quickly ask, and yeah.
Thanks. So, just to get to it, basically, like you mentioned, like aligning with leadership, getting a golden list. But so, what if somebody's goal is to ace GTM and just maximize MRR by a certain deadline? And the condition, like the constraint here is that person doesn't really has only spent a few months into actual work experience, and and leadership has given him complete control of like GTM. How do you maximize MRR by a certain deadline when you have complete control over whatever the company can do in GTM, but you have very little experience? Not asking from like a product or like tools or technical standpoint, but like what mindset or what methodology do you use to actually, like, is that even something you should go for, MRR maxing, or should you take it slow? How do you do that?
Sure, yeah, you can MRR max. So what I would do is set up like a weekly review with either your team or leadership people to kind of be able to track progress. And if you're trying to get something done fast, you almost kind of like might even do like a daily stand up. And I do this done this throughout my career when I've had some project or something that really needed to go well. Um, I would um, I would set up like daily or even like weekly or even daily syncs in order to get that done. And you want to be able to track some metric that's going up and to the right? So MRR is actually a good one for this because it's you if you aren't on track and on Wednesday when you have your review meeting, then on Thursday you can spin up new campaigns and launch new things and get new signups and customers by the time you review it next week. So I would just set up like a very fast review cadence on everything. And then in terms of doing the like deciding what to actually work on, you want to look for things that are definitively working. So customers that have signed up in the past, why did they sign up? What types of companies are they? Can we find more of those types of companies? In my previous job, whenever we had a customer sign up, I used to run a lookalikes on those and find like 10 more customers that I felt were reasonably like them and outbound them. And so you can really shorten the like growth loops that you use for this stuff. And the ability to kind of just like check in on is the number going up on like a very fast cadence is probably the number one way to make sure that you're on track. It's kind of painful because it just puts a lot of pressure on you, but it's the best way to sort of escape the initial phase of are we growing at all? Are we doing anything that's worthwhile?
Right, thanks so much. This was actually great. Like, I'm definitely gonna like follow you on LinkedIn to see more of your
Oh,
posts.
awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Everett.
Well, guys.
Yeah. I think one last thing that we would want to do is I would want to thank you so much for joining us today for this very session, answering all of our questions, and just requesting everyone if you guys could switch on your cameras, we'll just take a quick photo so that we can post it up on LinkedIn. But yeah, quick request if you guys could switch on your camera. Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Yeah. Okay, cool. I'll just take a quick shot. Yeah, done. Guys, before you guys leave, I just have one last thing to share. That's a quick intro about who we are, and that's just going to take me a minute. So, my name is Ritan. By the way, I did not introduce myself at the start. I'm the CBO of Ames Consulting Services. So, we are a GTM engineering company, and I have with me Priyank, who's our founder. So this is our company page. You guys can go onto it, have a quick look at it. At the same time, we even have a YouTube channel that we run, where we constantly share about what all things do we do, what different tools are there in the market. We build tutorials on it. We have a playlist for clay tutorials as well. You guys can have a look at it. We also run a Slack community, by the way. So I'll be mailing you guys with the link of that Slack community, and you guys can even join that.
I think can you switch off your camera?
Sure, sure. I'm lagging.
Yes, you are lagging,
Is
so
it
that's
better
why.
now?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. So as I was saying, we do run a Slack community as well, where we have more such engagements, more such guest sessions being organized. So I'll be sharing a link with over email about that. And yeah, thank you so much for joining this session. And yeah, we look forward to having you for more of our sessions. And yeah, cool. See you guys. Thank you so much, Everett. Bye bye.
Yes, you're cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Ritan.
Bye everyone.
Bye.